What's up, fellow movie buffs and film connoisseurs? It's your self-proclaimed cinema shogun here, and it's finally time to talk some Spider-Man No Way Home spoilers. We've been waiting for this moment for what seems like a decade now. Although it's only been a couple of years, I swear it seemed like it's been forever. And there's so much to unpack here that I am overwhelmed. Let me just start this review by saying that I enjoyed the movie. I think that's important to say from the get-go. Right from the jump. Let me just go ahead and start this by saying that I enjoyed myself watching this movie. I enjoyed the movie. I had fun. Now, there's certain things in this movie that I can nitpick at and that I can critique, but that doesn't mean that I don't like the movie. So I just want to go ahead and get that out there right from the jump that I enjoyed this film. And I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of enjoyment out of this movie. Now, I'm not going to do a scene-by-scene breakdown of the film, but I'm going to touch on some of the things that I felt was important, and I'm going to give you my overall vibe here. We're going to talk some spoilers. Now, right from the get-go in this movie, it starts right where the last Spider-Man movie left off, and I really enjoyed that. It feels like all of these superhero movies we get, there's always like a time jump. Like the first Spider-Man movie with Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire. We watched that, watched them battle Green Goblin. And then Spider-Man 2 was like 2 or 3 years later. It seems like every superhero movie, there's always like a 2-year time jump, not only in how long you have to wait for the sequel, but in the movie universe itself. Very seldom do the movies just take up where the last one left off. And this movie literally takes up right where the last scene of Spider-Man Far From Home ended. So you don't have, there's no room here to wonder what's been going on for the past couple of years. You're just right there, thrown in the midst of the ending of the last film. So I thought that was awesome. There are some things though that I will say feel somewhat, I don't want to say they feel rushed, but there's some things that they kind of blow right past, and it works. It totally works for the film. But it's also things that you wish you could have sat on a little bit longer. Like this whole Spider-Man being wanted, they think he kills Mysterio, he's kind of a criminal. That didn't really last long in the movie. It happened real quick. I felt like we could have dealt with the whole movie of Spider-Man on the run, Spider-Man battling it out in court, different interesting things like that. But we really blow right past that. Like, yeah, people hate Spider-Man. They think he's a murderer. He goes to court. We do get a really funny scene when Ned and MJ and Peter, they're getting interrogated by the police, and they're not saying anything. Peter and MJ aren't saying anything, but Ned just totally spills the beans on accident, and it fits perfectly with his character. So right there, that was probably one of the funniest parts of the movie for me, but we kind of blow right past it. It doesn't sit with it long. It sits with that aspect of the story for just a couple of minutes, and then bam, in walks Matt Murdock. The whole crowd starts cheering. That's one thing I want to touch on real quick. This is a movie you're going to want to go see with a crowd. Half the movies I go see nowadays, I feel like I'm by myself in the theater. Even Marvel movies, big movies. I go to them opening weekend. There's literally no one there anymore. This movie, we had a packed theater. And for the first time in years, people were screaming and yelling. You could hear the applause. You could hear the excitement from people when certain people would make entrances into the movie and when certain things happened in the movie. So this is a movie that's really going to benefit from the crowd experience. Just hearing people cheer in the middle of a film is something that I forgot how good it felt. I forgot how good that felt. And it happened multiple times in this movie. I don't know how maybe your theaters were, but my theater was definitely excited about a lot of things that happened in this movie, and they were really excited when Matt Murdock showed up. But you only sit with Matt Murdock for a few moments, 30 seconds, 35 seconds. Now, I'm not saying that we needed more of him in this movie. It totally fits. Like I said, a lot of the things that happen in this movie, you feel like you're blowing right through them, and it works because the plot and the way the movie is written, it works for the movie. But there's so many things you wish you could just pause time real quick. Let me just chill in this kitchen for a few more minutes with Peter Parker and Matt Murdock. You know, a brick comes through the window or something and Matt Murdock catches it. And Peter's like, how did you do that? And he's like, well, I'm a good lawyer. It's just like, man, those moments, I just really wish that we could have sat a little bit longer with that. Because I feel like they could have made a whole movie just of like Peter on the run, brought Craven in, maybe hunting him down, have him battling it out in court with Daredevil, you know, Matt Murdock defending him, being his lawyer. I would have loved a whole movie just about that. But instead, we get like 2 minutes spent on it before we're blasting off into the next thing, which is basically Spider-Man facing off with Dr. Octopus on the bridge. And right off the bat, you could tell from this little scuffle that he gets into with Dr. Octopus that the action in this movie is going to be next level, you know, as opposed to the last two Spider-Man movies. A lot of people might not pay attention to this, but in the last two Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man doesn't even really throw punches. Name one time that Spider-Man punched the Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming. I really haven't watched Far From Home as much as Homecoming, but I don't really remember a lot of like punching and fighting. This movie gets brutal. Like, you get some savage Spider-Man boxing the hell out of people in this movie. So right from this opening action scene, you get the sense that, okay, they're going to be a little more nose holds bar when it comes to the action here. This movie is not going for as much kiddie level action as the last two. So you get some grown man action here. You get some Spider-Man getting bashed into cars, bashed through signs. He's getting his ass whooped by these tentacles, I'm going to be honest with you. But he outsmarts them with this nanotechnology and then winds up taking over Dr. Octopus's tentacles. What I will say is, when I said there wasn't as much kiddie action in this movie, there are some things that are kind of silly. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, they had their humor, but they were pretty serious in tone, and the villains were pretty serious in tone. And even when you go back and watch them these days, people argue if they hold up or not. For me, I just watched them last night, and I love them. They're perfection. They're perfection in my eyes. The first two Spider-Man movies, chef's kiss perfect, if you ask me. The villains in those movies were a little more serious than MCU villains, for sure. But they kind of MCU'd up Dr. Octavius and the way he takes over Dr. Octavius's tentacles with the nanotech and kind of just renders him useless, like real quick. I wanted to see a little more action there, but the action we did get was awesome. Like him fighting under the bridge, it was awesome. But I feel like I'm jumping the gun a little bit. That's what I don't want to do, because there's, like I said, there's so many things to unpack here. Let's rewind a little bit. We got to rewind a little bit. Everyone knowing that he's Spider-Man and him coming up with this idea that he's going to go talk to Doctor Strange and basically, you know, cast this spell on everyone for everyone to forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, that was kind of like, I don't know how to feel about that plot line. It worked. It worked. It got the job done. But I really feel like they could have went with something a little more sophisticated here. And him just going to get this spell cast by Doctor Strange, and in the middle of the spell, he's just, you know, he's messing it up. He's just messing it up. He's like, oh, well, MJ has to know. Oh, Ned has to know. May has to know. And then the whole time, he's like messing up the universe, the multiverse. He's messing up Doctor Strange's spell. And that's what ultimately causes everything to happen. So all of these villains, you know, pour into the movie from other multiverses. I thought that was, I guess it's some Peter Parker-ish type of stuff. I mean, it kind of fits with this kind of with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. It fits with this MCU type of storyline. So it didn't bother me. It definitely didn't bother me, but it's something that I would have done differently. Like, I would have went a different route to make these things happen. I'm not sure exactly what route I would have taken, but as I think about it, maybe I'll make a video on what I would have done. But I would have done something a little differently here. It kind of feels a little, I don't know, like, I don't know how to put it, how exactly I would put it. It just seems a little too easy, and it seems like a little bit unlikely. It felt kind of weird. And Doctor Strange in this movie overall felt kind of weird to me. I enjoyed him being in the movie. He wasn't in the movie too much, which was something I did touch on in my non-spoiler review. Doctor Strange, I feel like, was in this movie just the right amount, like just enough. You know, perfectly blended into the film. You never felt like it was a Marvel team up between Doctor Strange and Spider-Man. It felt like a Spider-Man movie with Doctor Strange playing a certain role in it, but never did he try to take the shine. Never did the movie go in a route where it felt like it was about Doctor Strange. It always felt about Spider-Man. But he felt a little different. He didn't feel like Doctor Strange from the Doctor Strange movies. He didn't even necessarily feel like Endgame Doctor Strange. He felt a little more sillier, I guess. But I guess that's kind of how he would have to be when interacting with Spider-Man, interacting with a teenager. So that could be forgiven. But if you're looking for the same exact Doctor Strange from the Doctor Strange movie, I would say temper your expectations a little bit and think of more of a comedic version of that. Because in most portions where Doctor Strange was in this movie, he felt like a little more comedic than usual. Which a lot of things in this movie, like I was just saying, felt like they didn't have to be as comedic, but they were. That's just how the MCU is. So I was expecting that. So Doctor Strange seems a little bit less serious, I guess, in this movie. But fast forwarding back to where we were, Spider-Man doing that, messing up his spell, that's what brings in all the characters, all the different villains, and the different Spider-Mans. But the way they handled Dr. Octopus, I thought was good at first, and then they started going this little, kind of a silly route. And then, as he, I guess, defeats Dr. Octopus because he uses the nanotech to take over Dr. Octopus's tentacles, here comes Green Goblin. Like, bam. You don't even get no time to really sit with Dr. Octopus before, bam, now Green Goblin's here. Green Goblin pops up, you get to see him. He's in his same costume, basically, from the first Spider-Man movie, throws a little pumpkin bomb, and then out of nowhere, now, here we are. We're no longer on the bridge. Now we're just in Doctor Strange's lair. That's one of the problems that I do have with this movie. I felt like, why not sit here and allow us to sit with whatever's happening on this bridge? It's almost like they just had to cut that little portion off. So I guess at some point, something happened. I'm not sure exactly what happened on the bridge, but Spider-Man gets zapped right here into Doctor Strange's lair. And we find out that Doctor Strange has not only Dr. Octopus, in like a little jail cell, but he also has the Lizard. And now we got Dr. Octopus from the original Spider-Man series, and we got Lizard from Amazing Spider-Man. The Lizard in this movie is probably my least favorite villain, and that he was always... I love the Lizard in the comics, but as far as the Spider-Man movies go, if I had to pick one villain that I absolutely did not like, I really didn't care for the Lizard in Amazing Spider-Man. I didn't care for Electro or either form of Harry Osborne Green Goblin in the Spider-Man movies either, but I felt like the Lizard in this movie definitely, I don't know, I didn't care for him. Just like I didn't care for him in the first movie. I don't like the design of the character. I was hoping that we could have gotten a better design for him because he's in a different universe. Kind of how they did a different design for Electro. I wish that maybe this Lizard could have looked more like the Lizard, more like he's supposed to. But instead, he just looks like this CGI Goomba monster like he did in Amazing Spider-Man. So they didn't really do anything to change the CGI there, which I felt like that was a misstep. I feel like they could have changed that a little bit. But while we're touching on the villains, let's go ahead and just talk about all of the villains in this movie and get that portion of the review out of the way. I already talked about the Lizard. I really didn't care for his character in this movie. Didn't have much to do. No real character progression. Just a CGI monster. Didn't care for him in this movie, just like I didn't care for him in Amazing Spider-Man. Really didn't have any need to be there. Electro was probably one of the more confusing parts of this movie for me because every other villain and character that came from a different multiverse or whatever, a different timeline in this movie, all acted and looked the same way as they did in their past movie. So Dr. Octopus was exactly how you remember him from Spider-Man 2. Albeit he wasn't the way he was in like the last 5 minutes. He was still crazy and evil, so he hadn't had a chance to turn back good. But he was the same. Norman Osborn was the same crazy. Of course, he wasn't dead, but he's in the movie. And he was basically the Norman Osborn that you remember him from in the first Spider-Man movie. Sandman was Sandman from Spider-Man 3. You know, he basically acted the same. He was even a good guy. I don't want to say a good guy. He was kind of a conflicted character throughout this movie, where he did some bad and he did some good. But at the beginning of the movie, you could tell like he was trying to help Spider-Man. And he was trying to figure out what was going on. He was confused, but he still has trust issues. And I would too, especially when you have a whole different Peter Parker who just zapped you into a prison. So you really can't blame Sandman for never figuring out what he wants to do, you know? So in this movie, he was good, bad, he was just all around confused. So really can't blame him. But all in all, I don't want to say he got character progression. He just was fitting with the same Sandman we saw in Spider-Man 3. So he didn't go too crazy, balls off the wall, to reverse the fact that you knew that he was never really a bad guy. So I still don't view him as a real bad guy in this movie. He's kind of someone that's just going along with whatever's happening, and he's just like on the fence. So there's Sandman. But Electro, like I said, he was different than all the other characters. He looked different and he acted different. He didn't act anything like the Electro that we knew from Amazing Spider-Man 2, and he didn't look like him. He was like a whole new character who was one-dimensional for the most part. Like, he was just going around talking about power, yeah, this unfound power, new power. He had a few good jokes, definitely, and I like the overall design that they did with him better, you know, when he ultimately came back for the final act. So I like the look of him better, but they didn't really do much with him. They just made him look cooler and act cooler, I guess. He didn't act like a nerd or anything like that. Just totally different from, you know, the other movie. And that's why I was saying, like, if they were going to go so far as to do this with Electro, then they could have just made the Lizard look like the Lizard that we know and love from the Spider-Man comics. But hey, it is what it is. So we got Electro down. We got the Lizard down. We've talked about Octavius. He was one of the characters in this movie. Dr. Octopus was one of the villains that probably had the most character progression. He came back and he was evil again. And then they had to switch him back good, like he was at the end of Spider-Man 3, or Spider-Man 2. And ultimately, in the end of the movie, you think that he's going to be bad again, but he actually does something good. And I was happy about that. Because when he showed up, I was like, what? Oh, man. So that whole portion of the movie where Peter Parker's trying to work on a little chip to put on the back of his head to make the tentacles no longer, you know, take over his body, that was just a whole nothing, you know? If Dr. Octopus in the end of this movie came back and was evil again, then all of that portion of the movie would have been for nothing. But he was still good, so I appreciated seeing that. Now, the main villain of this movie was Norman Osborn. And he was very much the same Norman Osborn from the first Spider-Man movie. And I thought William Dafoe did a great job in Spider-Man 1. And I think he did a great job in this movie. Out of everyone, he just fell. It's so crazy how he just fell right back into the role. He fell right back into the role, and it's something that he can do with his face. I don't know what it is, but I was noticing it last night when I was watching Spider-Man 1 again. And it's something I notice, you know, every time I watch the movie, but I haven't watched Spider-Man 1 in a few years, and just watching the acting. Because people say that movie doesn't hold up, but I really believe that William Dafoe in that movie gives an Oscar-level performance. The way he, like, snarls his face and just, he puts that little voice on when you know it's the Green Goblin talking. He embodies the role, and he fell right into the role. Like, he didn't miss a single step at all. Didn't miss a single step. He was creepy, just a good villain, an all-around good villain. Now, I thought we had a chance here to get a different Goblin suit. A lot of people hate the Goblin suit for Spider-Man 1. I'm one of the only people I know that absolutely love that suit. I love it. I don't know why. I know some people say it's like Power Rangers. I don't know. I love that suit. It's something about helmets and stuff for me. I don't know. I dig them. So I really liked the Green Goblin look, but I felt like this would have been an opportunity, if we're going to get a Green Goblin on screen again, to give us a different look. Give us a suit that maybe looks more like the comic book suit. But instead, we get the straight up Spider-Man 1 Green Goblin look. But then in the movie, he breaks the mask, and then he just winds up at the end of the movie wearing these little flight goggles similar to what Harry wore in Spider-Man 3. And I do not dig that. I do not dig when they put on Green Goblin and he doesn't have a mask. I'm sorry. Some people in the MCU and the Marvel movies, you don't have to put a mask on them. I love Wolverine. I understand that Hugh Jackman never wore a mask in the X-Men movies, and I still dug him as Wolverine. I still loved him as Wolverine. I don't want to see Green Goblin without a mask on with flight goggles. I don't want to see it. It didn't work in Spider-Man 3. They did it again here, and I don't understand why. Now, it's not a big issue for me at all because it's only in the movie for a few moments, but I just wish he could have had on a damn Goblin mask. Please, like, what is so hard about it? But we didn't get that. But overall, Norman Osborn as a character, or Green Goblin as a character, A1. A1. Every moment he's on the screen, he shined, and I really wish that he could have got more screen time. Like, even if none of these other villains came back and it was just Norman Osborn, I would have been totally happy. I would have been totally happy. But while I'm touching on the villains, what I will say is I feel like there was a lot of missed potential here. Because they didn't even do the Sinister Six. I don't know how long it will be before we get another chance at the Sinister Six. You know? That's something that's going to take a lot of build-up. Now, I didn't want to see a multiverse Sinister Six. I wanted the first on-screen Sinister Six to be naturally built up over years with a certain Spider-Man. You know, I mean, of course I wanted to see it with Tobey because that's my favorite Spider-Man. It didn't happen. Then we thought we were going to see it build with Andrew Garfield. It didn't happen. And then it became obvious to me, of course, after this movie, that we were never going to see it with Tom Holland. Or at least I don't think so. But I don't know. You know, we do have other villains out there that could make up the Sinister Six. But I don't know how long it will be, or if ever we will get to this point where we got all of these villains right here in this movie and we didn't do it. Like, I got to make a whole video on that. We're going to have to make a whole video on that because I could rant about that all day. It was just right there. It was just right there and they didn't do it. Which leads me to a lot of things that were right there and they didn't do it. There's a few things in this film that just felt like they were right there and they didn't do what they could have done with it. Like, I didn't dislike what they did with it, but the potential, it had so much more potential. There are so many parts of this movie that I felt like had so much more potential, and they didn't go those places with it. And it's only upsetting to me because I don't think we'll ever get this type of moment again. You understand? But I'll touch on that a little bit later in this review. But as far as the villains go, that's how I felt about all the villains. But the way they interwove them into this movie, it didn't feel like a clusterfuck, if you will. Like Spider-Man 3, it felt jumbled. Amazing Spider-Man 2, it felt jumbled. This movie, they found a way to make it work with all of these characters to the point where I didn't feel overcrowded. I didn't feel like an overload. Were there some messy points? Yes, and we'll get to that. But I didn't feel like it was messy because of all of the characters. The MCU, and I touched on this in my non-spoiler review, the MCU knows how to make movies with tons of characters. They made the Avengers films. You know, you got Civil War. You got different movies within the MCU that dealt with so many different characters. If anyone knows how to handle an ensemble cast and a lot of different characters, the MCU knows how to do it. Now, I like the non-MCU Spider-Man movies better, or at least the original Spider-Man trilogy better. But as far as knowing how to deal with a lot of characters on screen and how to give every character, you know, a little portion of time, the MCU has it down pat. Because you get to spend a little bit of time with all of these characters and you don't feel too cheated. Like I mentioned earlier, there were moments where, yeah, I wish that I could have sat down for a whole movie with just Peter Parker and Matt Murdock and Spider-Man and Daredevil. Yes, but I understand that maybe for a future film or something like that. I understand that they couldn't necessarily put that in this movie. But the way they blended everyone in, it just worked perfectly. And it was so many people in this movie. There were so many villains, characters that they had to juggle, and I feel like they did a good job with it. Because even though there were so many characters, I felt like we got to see a good bit of character progression. I felt like Zendaya was better in this movie than any of the Spider-Man movies so far. She had a little bit more to do in this movie. She seemed more likable. You get to see more of her personality. In Spider-Man No Way Home, she was kind of sheltered. She had a couple little funny lines, but I felt like she didn't get to do as much. In this movie, she was doing stuff, she had lines, and you really got a feel for her character, and I really got to enjoy her character. And Ned, I felt like has gotten the shine over the past couple of movies. They always gave Ned, some time on screen. They did a good job with Ned. I really like Ned in these movies. Ned Leeds is probably one of the most forgettable characters in Spider-Man comic books for the most part, but in these movies, I really like Ned's character. And I felt like they gave Ned a lot to do here. When he got the cape, I bust out laughing. I couldn't help it. When he got the cape and he started floating, that was beautiful to me. And did anyone else get the vibe that they got big plans for Ned in the upcoming Spider-Man films? I feel like there was a couple of things in this movie that definitely hinted at, possible directions that they may go with Ned. For one, he gets the Doctor Strange's ring. He's doing magic. He talks about how his family said that they came from a magic family or something like that, that you kind of like pass off as a joke. But he's opening up the portals, and then when Doctor Strange comes, he even seems kind of impressed that he was able to do it. So I kind of feel like there's a little bit of hints and nods there, just like I was talking about how he's flying around on the cape. I feel like those were like little nods to the fact that possibly, Ned might go under Doctor Strange's tutelage at some point. But there was also a little awkward conversation in the laboratory with all of the different Spider-Men where, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man talked about how his best friend tried to kill him and winded up dying in his arms. And Ned kind of gets freaked out and he promises Peter that he will never, turn into a villain that tries to kill him. And there's like an awkward moment there. It kind of felt like some foreshadowing of something that may happen in future films. And there was already rumors out there about Ned turning into the Hobgoblin or something like that. And of course, in the comics he does, but I'm going to make a whole separate video just touching on that because I feel like there's a lot to unpack there that some people maybe didn't pick up on because there's so many other things going on in this movie, but there was just obvious hints to me that they have big plans for Ned in the future. Now, when Spider-Man Homecoming came out and Spider-Man Far From Home, I loved the dynamic between Peter, Ned, and MJ. Where I guess in Homecoming there wasn't as much of a dynamic because I didn't feel like Zendaya got a lot to do in that movie. But I really liked the dynamic between them. But as a traditional Spider-Man fan, I couldn't help but feel like, I don't know, maybe I wanted something different. Because don't get me wrong, I think they're great in all of the movies. I really dig the chemistry. I really, dug their friendship and stuff like that. But I'm a traditional Spider-Man fan. And Spider-Man is more of a loner. He's not a group type of guy, which is why I had so many problems with the MCU Spider-Man. Not only does he seem like he's always, tagging around with his friends, but also he's got, Iron Man popping up and, Doctor Strange popping up. And it just always seems like they were doing a little too much with him. Like, I was never a fan of, like, the tech suit and stuff like that. But I was on the verge of, like, I liked the dynamic he had with his friends, of course. But I wanted something different. I wanted a traditional Spider-Man story. But after this movie, it just really solidifies this little group. This little threesome, if you will, of friends. And I really wouldn't want it any other way after this movie. You know, even though I enjoyed Homecoming and Far From Home, I still wanted a traditional Spider-Man movie. But after this movie, their friendship just shines so brightly in this movie. Their chemistry was so A1. It was always A1 in the movies, in Homecoming and Far From Home. But in this movie, like, you got to really interact with all three of them. You know, you get more interactions from MJ. You get to see the dynamic between MJ and Ned and Peter. And I feel like this movie really shined upon their friendship. And the chemistry they have on screen together is just, it's just A1. You can't fake it. It's something that you know when you're watching it, like, these people have to be friends in real life. Like, these people have to like each other in real life and get along pretty good in real life, because how they are in this movie, it's just perfect. It makes me feel like the old school, like, 80s movies and early 90s movies, like the Goonies and the Sandlot and things like that. Like, you really get this vibe from this group of people. You really get the vibe that they're real friends and they go on these adventures. And I think when I go back and watch these movies at a later date, that's something that I will really appreciate. Knowing how it went for the 3 movies now over this trilogy, I want to go back and just watch how, they progress as friends over the 3 movies. And this movie just definitely shined a big spotlight on their friendship, and I really enjoyed that. I think that was probably one of the best parts about this movie, which is crazy because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of big reveals and characters that come back from movies you love. But I really feel like the best parts of this movie were Ned, MJ, and Peter and their interactions together. And speaking of Peter, and speaking of Tom Holland, he did a wonderful job. I said it before and I'll say it again. If you have been on the fence with Tom Holland as Spider-Man, I think by the end of this movie, by the last scene of this movie, you will be sold. You will be sold. I fully believe that at least 98 to 99% of the people out there who were on the fence about Tom Holland as Spider-Man, or just Tom Holland Spider-Man in general, will be sold after this movie. He gave a wonderful performance. Like, he took it super serious. In the MCU, I feel like this has to be one of, if not the best MCU performances so far. Right up there with Robert Downey Jr. in Endgame. Like, this has to be definitely, it's hard. I've only seen the movie once, and I'm really trying to go back through the whole Rolodex of the MCU. But this has to be one of, at least top 3. I don't want to give it number 1 spot, although it very well could be number 1. But definitely top 3 performances in the MCU thus far. Tom Holland brought the emotions. That kid knows how to cry and sell it. Like, when he's crying and when he looks angry, when he looks sad, he sells it so hard. He sells it so hard. And when Aunt May passed in the movie, when Aunt May died and he's crying, I looked to my left and the person next to me, you could just see their eyes watering up under their glasses. Their eyes are just watering up. Then I look over to my right. Eyes watering up. My eyes watering up. I didn't drop a tear, but I could feel them. I felt them in the back of my eyes and it wasn't because of Aunt May. Because honestly, I never formed a connection with this version of Aunt May. I like an older Aunt May. The younger, hotter Aunt May, it's cool and all, but I never felt a connection with her. Throughout these films, I didn't really care for her as a character. I didn't care for her as a character in this movie. Not saying that she did a bad job, but I didn't care about her, for the most part at all. So when she died, my emotions weren't from her dying. My emotions were strictly from how well Tom Holland sold it and the look on his face, like the look on his face and everything. So Tom Holland he knocked it out of the park. I would definitely say that. He knocked it out of the park. And I was someone who was on the fence as Tom Holland about Spider-Man, not because he hasn't been doing a good job. He's been doing a good job with the material he's been given. But like I said, I have problems with the way the MCU has handled this Spider-Man. But by the end of this movie, I'm just like, man, you can tell he cares about the character. You could tell in this movie that he cares about the character and he cares about making a good movie because he sold it. Every scene, he gave it his all. He gave it his all, and it's something that you don't necessarily always see in superhero movies. But I'll be damned if Tom Holland didn't come out there and bring his A game for this movie. Like, he knew this was going to be a big movie, and he brought the emotions, and you know, you could hear the whole theater getting emotional throughout various parts of this movie, all mainly because of Tom Holland. So Tom Holland did a great job. He did a great job. Now, you'll have to forgive me if this review is all over the place. I know that I'm all over the place with it, but I literally just got out of watching this movie just a few minutes ago. And I'm sitting down just trying to really soak it all in, what I just saw, because man, it was crazy. So I know I'm all over the place here, but I'll try to do maybe a more structured review in the future. But at least you know you're getting my honest thoughts and opinions, and you're getting them fresh out of the movie theater. So this is my legit, honest first reaction to the movie. So we already covered basically up until the point where Spider-Man gets zapped somehow into Doctor Strange's lair. So while he's down there, they find out that there's other, you know, multiverse villains out there that Spider-Man needs to go track down. Doctor Strange gives Spider-Man this little piece on his arm that we've been wondering what it does. It zaps the villains back into Doctor Strange's little prison. So he goes out there, he's got the black suit on, which I think is dope. They always try to figure out ways to incorporate new and different costumes, especially with this MCU Spider-Man. It's like they won't sit and focus with any certain suit. We're just going through different suits. But I dug the black suit. But he goes out here and tracks down Electro and Sandman. A little battle ensues, but Sandman basically helps Spider-Man defeat Electro, which I thought was good because it shows you that they didn't just rip these characters out of the movie and just use them however they wanted to. They tried to rip them out of their movies and apply what happened in those movies to the characters as well. Because Sandman, when we last saw Sandman, was not a bad guy. You know, he kind of makes amends with Peter. And throughout the whole movie, he's more of a confused villain as opposed to like an evil villain. And we end off with him not, you know, dying. We end off with him being okay with Spider-Man, if you will. So he helps Spider-Man. Spider-Man zaps Electro back into Doctor Strange's lair. Then he zaps Sandman. And now we're back here in Doctor Strange's lair again with all of the different villains. And I didn't know how to feel about it. Because in these portions, this is where I felt like the movie was kind of MCU-ish, kiddie-ish. Like, I didn't dig, you know, all of these villains who were normally taken seriously, especially in their movies, just being reduced to these people behind this little plasma, you know, jail cell where they're all just cracking jokes. You know, they just all turned into a big joke. And I didn't dig that because these are supposed to be some crazy evil villains. You know, albeit they might have their own different, you know, agendas and things like that. And some of them winded up being good in the long run. Some of them were just confused all along. But at the end of the day, they're intimidating villains that were meant to be taken seriously in their own films. But in this movie, they kind of turned all of them into like jokesters, you know? And they're just all throwing around these jokes. We get to the point where we know that there's only one person left that Spider-Man has to go track down. And that's the Goblin, the Green Goblin. So while I'm preparing for a big battle, like Tom Holland Spider-Man's probably going to go out here, try to find Green Goblin, have to team up with Toby, something like that. No. Norman Osborn just turns himself in. He just finds Peter's, Aunt May's little homeless shelter, goes and talks to her and turns himself in to Spider-Man. They take him back to the lair. And it's time to send them back to their multiverses. But the only thing is, a lot of these villains die from the stories that they come from, or from the multiverses that they're coming from. So they don't necessarily want to go back. Because if Electro goes back, he's going to be a goner. Dr. Octopus goes back, he's a goner. Norman Osborne goes back, he's a goner. The Lizard goes back, he's a goner. I think the only person there that would have gone back and been alive still is Sandman, which is why he seems so conflicted throughout this whole movie. But Tom Holland, or Peter Parker, doesn't want to do that. He wants to try to figure out a different way. But Doctor Strange isn't having it. He knows that will cause too many problems, and he doesn't want to do that. And this is where I get conflicted as well. Because a whole battle ensues where Spider-Man, Peter Parker, decides, I'm going to take this little cube away from Doctor Strange and try to figure out my own way to do things. And that's something that I didn't feel like would be likely to happen. Although it happened in the movie, it didn't seem right. You know, that was another portion of the movie where I felt like they could have written it a different way. Just brought these characters in the multiverse through a different way and tried to send them back in a different way that didn't, you know, incorporate Spider-Man being kind of an asshole and stealing Doctor Strange's stuff and running off with it. But I really liked the battle that ensued between them two. That was really dope. And I felt like that was some of the best Doctor Strange we've seen. When we saw Doctor Strange, you know, trying to get the cube from Spider-Man, that was some of the best Doctor Strange we've seen, which is weird because throughout a lot of the movie, Doctor Strange is more jokey, but in these moments, there was some really cool action, some really cool visuals, and just to see them go back and forth, you know, trying to outsmart each other through different means to ultimately wind up with this cube, and Spider-Man winds up winning, you know, for the most part. Spider-Man gets out with the cube and goes on to make the dumbest decision he could possibly make, which really surprised me, because did he not learn anything from Far From Home? Which brings me to another thing that I didn't like about this movie. What is it about this Tom Holland Spider-Man that is so inclined to make dumb-ass decisions? Like, he gave Tony Stark's glasses and the power to all of this technology and Stark Tech to Mysterio in Far From Home. The stupidest thing he could have possibly done. He did it. But instead of learning from that mistake, here he comes up with the bright idea that I'm going to let all of these villains out of their cell and I'm going to help them. He didn't, I mean, common sense. Even if you're going to take this stuff away from Doctor Strange, whatnot, you would at least keep these people in their cell while you try to figure out what you're going to do. No. He takes all of them out of their cell, doesn't chill around in a lab, doesn't take them to a secret location. No. Takes them directly to Aunt May, directly to where he's living, directly to his loved ones, which is a Spider-Man move that Spider-Man would never do. Spider-Man would never, or Peter Parker, any version of it, would never knowingly take all of these villains, regardless if you think they could be saved or not. He would never take all of them directly to Aunt May. That right there was one of like, what are y'all even doing here? It wasn't enough to make me dislike the film because, like I said, I love the movie, but that was just like, man, are you serious? Are you serious? Especially when you consider the fact of what just happened in Spider-Man Far From Home. And some of the stupid decisions that he made in Homecoming. It's like this Peter Parker is a screw up on a whole different level. You know, the Peter Parker we know, he used to screw up at his job, you know, be late to meet MJ at her recitals and, you know, to see her play. He would mess up. He was a screw up in that way. Spider-Man in these movies is a screw up into the way that he just is so naive and gullible that he makes the dumbest decisions that you could possibly ever think of. Not only did you just do some stuff that's just uncharacteristic of your character by stealing Doctor Strange's stuff and trying to run off with it and not listen to him, you literally broke all of these villains out of a prison and just took them straight to where you were sleeping at, where you're laying your head at, and took them straight to Aunt May, which is like the #1 rule that Spider-Man doesn't do. He doesn't take villains to Aunt May. He definitely doesn't take them to go see, you know, MJ and all these other people that he's close to. You want to keep those people far apart. So that really made me like, I didn't dig that. I didn't dig that at all. I did want to see some interaction between Aunt May and Dr. Octopus, though, because in the original Spider-Man comics, they wind up having a little relationship and they get married for a little while. So I wanted to see a little interaction there, but we don't get much. So now we got all of these villains that Spider-Man literally just fought and captured, all inside of this apartment, which is Happy's apartment. And there's little jokes flying around here and there, and Spider-Man is trying to create something, you know, a chip to put into Dr. Octopus's head, but you just know the whole time, you're like, this isn't going to end well. This is obviously not going to end well. The most stupidest decision he could make. And of course, Dr. Osborne, or Norman Osborn, Green Goblin, is the one to go ahead and snap and start going crazy. And Peter Parker, like, after sitting here chilling with these people for hours, working on stuff, I guess finally his spider senses go off. And he starts realizing, like, oh, something's flaky here. Something's messed up. And it's Norman Osborn. He realizes that after he tries to hone in on what it is. And he realizes, oh, it's Norman Osborn that's about to start tripping out. But my thing is, your spider sense didn't tell you this from the beginning. And not even just your spider sense. Your common sense didn't tell you from the beginning not to take these people to your apartment. Lord, why did you do this? But I guess you had to figure out a way for these people to get out of the jail anyway. So I guess they just went that route. Okay, it is what it is. So I keep wanting to call him Dr. Osborn. Norman Osborn flips back into the Green Goblin. You can tell that he's different by the way William Dafoe starts making his face flip and the way he starts talking. And he proceeds to go balls to the wall, whooping Tom Holland's ass. I mean, brutally beating the living out of Spider-Man, relentlessly, just straight up power bombing him through whole floors of this building. Just straight up power bombing him through floors, stomping him out. You know, it's crazy because the last two Spider-Man movies didn't have a lot of punchy action. There was action, but there wasn't a lot of physical violence, if you will. There wasn't a lot of punching each other, kicking each other. This movie was so brutal. The way Norman Osborn just straight up wrecked Spider-Man. He just straight up beat the living shit out of him in this apartment complex. Just, oh my God. Literally, I don't know if we've ever seen anyone get beat that badly in a superhero movie, the way he just manhandles them. Just like I keep saying, he just straight up power bombs them through whole floors, power bombs them through the floor, and they just fly through different floors. And I'm just sitting here like, whoa, they really took the action next level, which all of the action in this movie is definitely next level as opposed to the last Spider-Man movie. So, you know, that is something to really be happy about, something I was really happy about. So this whole little battle ensues. Next thing you know, by the end of it, Aunt May's dead. Green Goblin kills Aunt May. Spider-Man, or Peter Parker, Tom Holland, he has this emotional breakdown, runs off. Then we're sitting with Ned and MJ. They're inside of Ned's house. Ned and her are talking, and he accidentally winds up opening up the portal. So he does it again. Then he tries to open up the portal to see if they can find Spider-Man. Now, they're not trying to find a different Spider-Man. They're trying to find their Spider-Man. They don't even know that there's a multiverse Spider-Man or different Spider-Mans here. But it opens up and you see a Spider-Man in the alley. And honestly, I thought it was going to be Tom Holland. I didn't think that this was where they were going to introduce the other Spider-Man at. But after a while, and you see, I'm like, oh, they're about to straight up bring in Andrew Garfield. And they do. The Amazing Spider-Man jumps through the portal. He's there, and there was a lot of funny interaction there. It wasn't how I would want to. It's not the way that I wanted to see the Spider-Man introduced. I wanted to see maybe a little more seriousness there, but we got what we got. And at first, I was at least happy with that portion. When Andrew Garfield came through, they were joking. the grandma or whatever wanted him to go clean the cobweb in the corner, and he crawled over to it and cleaned it. That was absolutely hilarious. Their whole interaction there was hilarious, and I think Andrew Garfield did a great job in this movie, and it really made me sad. Watching this movie, I really felt sad because I feel like Andrew Garfield should have got one more shot at Spider-Man. He really should have. He's not my favorite Spider-Man. I would literally rank him number 3, Tobey, Holland, Garfield, but he wasn't a bad Spider-Man. The problems with the Amazing Spider-Man movies weren't because of him. He did a good job, and I liked him in this movie. I think he shined in this movie possibly even more than Tobey Maguire, which is who I was really excited to see. But I think I may have even liked Andrew Garfield's performance in this movie more than Tobey's, to be honest with you. And it felt like he was more happy to be there than Tobey. But that's probably just because the personalities these people have in real life. But I think Andrew shined more than I thought he would in this movie. So I really dug I didn't dig the way they introduced him, but once I sat with it and we get the jokes flying around, I was happy. I'm like, cool. But what I didn't want to happen was they introduced Tobey the same way. I'm hoping, like, okay, we got Andrew Garfield now. Now Tom Holland's going to be off crying somewhere about what just happened to Aunt May, and maybe then he'll run into Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. But that's not the case. Ned opens up another portal, in walks Tobey. At the same time, even though I'm disappointed by this entrance, I'm disappointed that this is the way they introduced him. Seeing him walk in there, of course, I have to be happy because I love Tobey. I love Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. That's the Spider-Man I grew up with. And the whole crowd lost it. Like, when Andrew Garfield came out, the crowd went crazy. When Tobey Maguire came out, it felt like I was at a football game. Like, you could feel the floor rumbling. The whole crowd was so ecstatic throughout this whole movie. I know I touched on that before, but the theater experience with this movie was next level, something I haven't gotten in years. And when Tobey came out, the crowd went absolutely insane. And I just, I felt so good inside. Even though it wasn't the way that I wanted him to be introduced, he was there, and it was just awesome. It was absolutely awesome to see him come on screen. But he wasn't in his Spider-Man suit, and I was okay with that too. So the way they introduced the Spider-Mans were not the way that I would have done it, but I feel as if regardless of how you did it, it was going to be awesome. It was one of those things. But while we're talking about Tobey and Andrew's entrance, let me just go ahead and give you my overall feel for both of these characters in this movie. I mentioned it before, I mentioned it again. Tobey Maguire is my favorite live-action Spider-Man. He's the Spider-Man I grew up with, and still to this day, even after seeing No Way Home, I still believe that Tobey Maguire is the best Spider-Man, and his movies were the best Spider-Man movies. But in this film, I feel like they didn't give him the proper respect in a way. They didn't do anything wrong with the character, but they also didn't give him much either. It seems like they gave Andrew more to do than they did Tobey, or at least gave him a little more emotions and more of an emotional story arc in this movie than they did Tobey. Albeit, neither character really got much to do. Which is my main gripe from this film, is that a movie that brings in Tobey and it brings in Andrew, they didn't get much to do. In fact, I will say Electro got more screen time and probably just as many lines as Tobey Maguire. And that was extremely disappointing for me. That was the most disappointing part of this movie, was that I just expected more. And not even that I just expected more, I feel like we deserved more. And that's not me just being a fanboy, like a greedy fan or, something like that. If you're gonna do this moment, if you're gonna bring these people in, do it right. And not only did they, I feel like, kind of rush their entrance into the movie by just Ned bringing them in with this portal, but they didn't give them enough time to sit with Tom Holland or anything like that. They didn't give enough time. And seeing as I don't know when we'll ever have this opportunity again, if ever, I really feel like they dropped the ball in that situation. So I liked every part with Tobey Maguire in it. I just feel like he didn't have as much to do and as much of an emotional story as Andrew, and I don't know why. Do they just not respect those Spider-Man movies as much as they do the Amazing Spider-Man movies? Or is it because I guess we got more closure from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies than we did the Amazing Spider-Man movies, if you will. Like, at the end of the day, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man seems like a Spider-Man who had it all together at the end. You know, he has this girl, he has MJ, he probably settled down, had a family. This definitely gave off like dad vibes Spider-Man. You know, that's what Tobey Maguire was giving off. Whereas Andrew Garfield, we left off with him losing his girlfriend. You know, we left off with him losing Gwen Stacy, and we never really got closure to that story. So in this movie, there were just a few things in there, a few lines and a few moments where I really felt like I was emotionally connected with Andrew's Spider-Man way more than Tobey Maguire's, especially when Andrew jumped and saved MJ in this movie, and he did it the right way, as opposed to the way that he tried to save Gwen Stacy when her back snapped. That was like emotional, you could see it on his face. He had, I don't know, he just, as far as the Spider-Mans go, I just felt like he had more to do. So overall, I was really happy with everything they did in the movie. I just wish that we could have gotten a little something more. Because, I mean, you got Tom Holland, you got Andrew Garfield, you got Tobey Maguire, you got all of these 3 Spider-Mans, and we don't even get a moment of them swinging through the city. You know, we don't get them web swinging through buildings. We don't even get a moment of them maybe fighting. I think that would have been cool. Maybe they tussle a little bit when they first, you know, see each other. Something like that, Spider-Man on Spider-Man action. We don't get any of that. We basically just get them sitting in a lab for a few moments. So that brings me back to where we're at in the movie. After Tobey and Andrew's entrance, they go to find Spider-Man, the Tom Holland, Peter Parker Spider-Man. And he's crying on the same rooftop that he always likes to go hang out on. You get a quick little emotional moment there that was pretty deep with Tom Holland and Zendaya and Ned. I can't remember Ned's real name. And there's a little emotional moment there that I enjoyed. And then they're like, oh, well, we got some people here that want to see you and talk to you. And down jumps the other Spider-Man. Down jumps Andrew and Tobey. And there was no excitement there. Don't get me wrong. The crowd was going wild. I was excited. Like, oh, we're about to see Tom Holland realize there's other Spider-Man. We're about to see Tom Holland interact with these 2 other Spider-Men. And then Tom Holland, after... And it's not his fault. It's just the way the script was written, because Tom Holland was bringing the emotions. He just looks up and sees them and doesn't really bat an eye at it. Now, I know that Aunt May just died and it's a real emotional time, but he doesn't seem surprised about it. There's no like, oh my God, moment. It's just like, oh, he looks up. Here's other versions of me. And he's just like, whatever. Now, I know Tom Holland's Spider-Man has been through a lot. He's fought Thanos. He's been through, you know, way more than these other 2 Spider-Men have been through. And I get it. So maybe it's a little harder to surprise him. And he already knows that there's multiverse, you know, villains here. So seeing as that there's a multiverse Spider-Man, it's probably, you know, he can assume that multiverse versions of him exist. But there was no like, oh my gosh, like awe-stricken moment there. It was just like, perfectly normal. I'm just talking to other versions of myself here. And then we get to the point where they're like in a lab. They're trying to create ways to stop all the villains and reverse the things that changed them into villains. And there's a lot of quippy little jokes there that I enjoyed. I enjoyed the interactions between everyone. But it just left you wanting more. It left you wishing that you had a whole movie of this, or at least a good portion of the movie of this, but you don't. The 2 Spider-Men really come in for the last act of the movie. You know, so they're in this lab and they're creating this way to stop the villains, and then it basically goes directly from there to the final battle of the movie, and you never get a chance to see what you wanted out of it. You know, I wanted to see Tom Holland's Spider-Man learning things from Andrew, learning things from Tobey. Tobey, you know, taking him under the wing, showing him the ropes. You know, I wanted to see them swinging through the city together, something. But you literally get this introduction of all three that seems lackluster because there's no excitement level there. And I know there's a lot of emotions already running, but there wasn't, it wasn't that moment that you wanted. And then you get them in the lab, you get all these jokes, and you're just wishing that you could just spend a whole movie with this. And it just automatically goes into the last act of the film or the last battle of the film. And they're all here on the scaffolding around the Statue of Liberty. And as soon as I saw them on the scaffolding in the final act of the movie, I couldn't help but think of Spider-Man 3. I couldn't help but think of the final act from Spider-Man 3 because the final act from Spider-Man 3 and the final act from this movie look oddly familiar. They look pretty identical, if you will. And I thought we learned our lesson from that, but we didn't. So the final act of this movie is basically Spider-Man, all the Spider-Mans fighting the villains while swinging around all these bars and scaffolding around the Empire State Building. And I felt like that was just another missed opportunity. I don't know what it is about the MCU Spider-Man movies that they keep shying away from New York. They shy away from the city of New York so much in these Spider-Man movies, and it doesn't make sense to me. New York is a character in Spider-Man just as much as anything else. When you think of Spider-Man, you think of New York. I'm not even from New York. I've only been to New York once in my life. But New York and Spider-Man are like this. Like, you can't really have one without the other. Yes, I've read plenty of Spider-Man comics where he maybe went into other areas, but Spider-Man in New York, it's like PB and jelly, cereal and milk. And in these MCU movies, it feels like they do whatever they can to keep Spider-Man out of New York. In Spider-Man Homecoming, they literally got Spider-Man out in Washington, D.C. They got Spider-Man running through the suburbs and things like that. And Spider-Man Far From Home, they shipped Spider-Man all the way to the other side of the world, and they got him in different countries. And in the Avengers films, Spider-Man's in outer space. He's all over the place, and very rarely do they get to sit with Spider-Man in New York City. And once again, in this movie, I felt like even though it was happening inside of New York City, they kept going other places, and they never really committed to a lot of web swinging and stuff like that, which is what I really appreciate from Spider-Man and what I want to see in the movies. Now, albeit I understand that the Statue of Liberty, and I know I probably called it the Empire State Building a couple times in this video, forgive me for that, but the Statue of Liberty is a part of New York. I get it. But the final battle didn't feel like a battle on the Statue of Liberty. It felt more like a battle on scaffolding, if you ask me. So the last battle was kind of messy. Underwhelming, if you will. I wanted to see them go, like I keep saying, I wanted to see them go through the city, take out these different villains. But it ultimately ends up with Spider-Man going on J. Jonah Jameson's podcast or whatever and telling everyone, oh, I'm going to the Empire State. Here I go again. I'm going to the Statue of Liberty. Everyone meet me there, all of you evildoers. And that was just weird. That was another situation where it was like, okay, it works, but damn, you could have did something better than that, because when you think about it, it's like, so you're telling me that the Lizard is chilling on his iPhone watching J. Jonah Jameson's podcast and sees that he needs to go to the Statue of Liberty, at a certain time, today, and that Dr. Octopus is somewhere, texting with his little octopus arms. It's like, oh, at 5 o'clock, I got to meet Spider-Man at the Statue of Liberty. And all of these villains, get this message from that. That was kind of weird, kind of corny, kind of lame, but it is what it is. Still an enjoyable movie. Like I said, there's so many things I could pick apart in this movie, but I still enjoyed it. But speaking of J. Jonah Jameson, before I even go any further into the ending of the movie, I thought he was going to be doing more in this movie. He didn't really have much to do. He was there. I enjoyed that he was there, but I'll be damned if I didn't want him to be a little more involved in this story. And I do feel as if he will possibly be more involved going forward. I mean, you can't just introduce him in this movie and then not have him in the next Spider-Man movie. So I would assume that his character is going to be appearing in future Spider-Man films. So that's going to be weird. We're going to have the same J. Jonah Jameson again, even though these other multiverse characters are gone. You know, this J. Jonah Jameson is going to be sticking around, or at least that's what it looks like. But I don't know. The climax of this movie, the end battle, was lackluster to me. It was cool seeing all the Spider-Man swing around and fighting. I dug it, but like I said, it could have been more. It could have been more. And I don't want to sound selfish and like a brat, because I keep saying that it could have been more, but really as a filmmaker, I would have done a little bit more with it. But I also understand that their hands are tied when it came to the Andrew and Toby situation, because so much of this movie was getting spoiled already. So they really couldn't do much with these characters outside of sound stages, you know, or else it would have totally been spoiled for everyone. But I really wish the final battle didn't resemble the final battle from Spider-Man 3. I wish it was something different. But when Green Goblin ultimately comes, dukes it out for a little while with Peter, and you just see Spider-Man going savage mode on him. He is going savage mode on him. If Green Goblin, like I said earlier, went savage mode on Tom Holland's Spider-Man, Tom Holland's Spider-Man went savage mode on William Dafoe, because he killed Aunt May and he did not hold any punches. This was insane, just the level of which he was just beating the crap out of him. Like, I thought he was going to kill him. And that's what he's getting at. I mean, he even gets to the point where he picks up the glider and he's about to stab him. And then here comes Tobey Maguire. He gets in the way, stops him from doing it. And that's probably one of the best Tobey moments in the movie, because he stops Tom Holland from becoming something he's not. He's not a killer. Spider-Man is not a killer. And he stops him, and then he gets stabbed. And then I'm like, no, the whole theater gets upset. Like I've been telling you, the whole theater's been cheering throughout this whole movie. The whole theater, you hear rumblings. And the person behind me is like, I know they better fucking not. And I'm sitting here, I'll turn to the person next to me like, they better not be doing this. They better not do this. They better not kill Toby. Y'all better not Han Solo Tobey Maguire. Because that's what it looked like was going to happen for a second. It looked like they were about to totally Han Solo Tobey Maguire, bring him back, give him very little to do, just bring him back for nostalgic purposes, and then murder him on screen like they did in The Force Awakens. But no, that is not what happened here. He didn't die. Thank the Lord in heaven, if there is one. He didn't kill Toby, thank you. Like, Tobey Maguire lives, but he gets stabbed, and for a moment, like, your heart sinks, because you think he's a goner. You think he's a goner. And then Andrew passes Tom Holland the little serum, stabs it in William Dafoe's neck, Green Goblin's neck. He goes back to normal, but you're sitting here thinking that Tobey Maguire's about to die. They go over to him, and he just shrugs it off. He's like, yeah, I've gotten stabbed before. No big deal. So that made me laugh, because it so looked like he was about to die, but he's just laying on the ground. Like, you can tell he's hurt bad, and he's just like, yeah, I've been stabbed before. This isn't my first rodeo. So he took it like a champ. He took the stabbing like a champ. But while all of this is happening, you can tell the multiverse is breaking open. And Doctor Strange is having a hard time controlling it. And I think that this is the moment where the multiverse is just totally going to rip open, and we're going to have to deal with the ramifications of that in the next Doctor Strange movie and the next movies going forward. But no, Peter Parker comes up with this idea that if they just do the original wish, and everyone forgets that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and everyone just forgets that Peter Parker exists, then everything can go back to normal. And once again, I'm upset by the decision making in this film, and once again, what's even more so upsetting is the MCU's lack of commitment to the multiverse. How many little occasions are we going to have like this before you just double down on the freaky multiverse? We had WandaVision, which made you think it was all about her opening up the multiverse, but then it was like, oh no, these are just all things that she created in her head. And even though it nodded towards the multiverse, it brought in the Quicksilver from X-Men. It didn't double down on the multiverse, so it just teased you with it, but didn't even open up the multiverse. So you're like sitting here this whole time thinking WandaVision is what's gonna, the show that's gonna, bring about the multiverse. but then it kind of does, but it really doesn't. And then you got Loki, a whole series about opening these different timelines. And you're like, I think it's going to open the multiverse, and then it kind of does, but they don't necessarily say that it does. And then now we hear in Spider-Man No Way Home, and we got the multiverse literally ripped open. We got characters coming from other movies that we never would have thought would exist in the MCU universe. And yet again, at the end of the movie, they fix it, and it's no longer a multiverse. Which I'm guessing something happens, and some things creep in because the new Doctor Strange movie is Multiverse of Madness, but you're just left sitting there like, why do y'all keep doing this? You keep bringing us to the brink of the multiverse and then trying to close it up and then trying to find out reasons why this isn't the thing that's going to open the multiverse. It's like, just do it already. We know the multiverse is coming. This movie is literally about multiverse characters, but at the end of the movie, you felt the need to tie it up like, oh, well, I guess Peter Parker's decisions don't open the multiverse after all. We fixed it. Like, just leave it open, because this is obviously where you all are going, but they won't double down on it. It's like they're clearly putting it right there, but then they shy away from it. It's like, just freaking do it already. We know it's coming. Just do it. Stop hinting at it in every movie and in every show and poking at us. Like, it's almost like they're having fun with us. Like, oh, you think this is what's going to open up the multiverse for good? Nope, bring it away. It's like, come on. This is, I think, 3 or 4 properties now that y'all have done this with. Just bring on the multiverse already. So that was kind of frustrating that at the end of this movie, they wrap it up and the multiverse, I guess, gets closed. But it brings about probably the most emotional movie of this film, because like I said earlier, this film really shines on the friendship between Peter and between Ned and between MJ, and the realization that they're going to forget, not just forget that he's Spider-Man, but they're about to forget that he exists, period. And like I said earlier, when Aunt May died and I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and people's eyes were watering up and my own eyes were watering up, well, when this happened, when it ultimately happened and there was a realization that everyone was going to forget that he existed, I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and there was just straight up waterworks. Just streams of tears coming down these people's faces. And I didn't break down that much. I didn't break down that much because I was saddened by it. But I was interested in what it might mean. Like, what does this really mean for Tom Holland's Spider-Man moving forward? So I felt the emotions, and it's definitely probably one of, if not the most emotional moment from this movie. But I started my mind automatically started going to like, what does this mean for Spider-Man? Does this mean that we're going to finally get Spider-Man that's not really an Avenger, that doesn't have all this Stark tech? Are we going to get like a normal Spider-Man now? Are we going to get a normal Spider-Man story? And by the end of this film, it really points towards the fact that that's what we're going to get. Now, he does go back, he finds MJ, he finds Ned, which he told him he was going to. And it's like, he's got all this stuff written down that he has prepared to say to them, to try to make them remember him so he can just pick up where they left off. But ultimately, he sees that they're happy. And he leaves it at that. He leaves it at the fact that I see they're happy, I'm going to let them live their lives. They're both still friends. Ned and MJ are both still friends who just got into college. He sees them, he buys the coffee, and he just lets them be. And he goes about his life, and he moves into the small little apartment, and it starts to turn towards looking like this is about to be the Spider-Man that I know and love. The more of a loner Spider-Man. You know, that's what this movie really aims towards. It's like, it closes out by everyone forgetting that Peter Parker exists and that he's Spider-Man. It closes out all of the storylines with the Avengers, and it wraps it up, and it allows for a new Spider-Man going forward. Not a new Spider-Man with a new actor, but the Spider-Man, more so of a Spider-Man that we know and that we love going forward. Because when he's in this apartment and you can see that he's sewing this new suit and it just looks shiny blue and red, and I see it from him, and I'm like, is that what I think it is? And it's literally the best Spider-Man suit that we've gotten so far. I loved Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man suit. I thought Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man suit, while not traditional, thought it was pretty cool. I dug Tom Holland's original Spider-Man suit. I've kind of liked all of the suits. I'm not a big fan of his Iron Spider suit, but as far as when they tried to make the traditional Spider-Man suits, I dug them. But this looks the most like the Spider-Man from the comics that I can think of. This was the Spider-Man suits of all Spider-Man suits. And when you see that, and you got the realization that no one knows he's Spider-Man, you got the realization that he's on his own now. He doesn't have a group of little friends helping him. He doesn't have the Avengers. He doesn't have Iron Man. He doesn't have all of this technology, nor does he have access to any of that. He is on his own. He's got his new suit. It doesn't have any tech in it. And he jumps out the window to go be his own hero. And I cannot wait to see where this goes. That was the most beautiful ending that they possibly could have done. Wrapping up the story of the MCU Spider-Man that we know, of him relying on so many other people, and this movie really grows him into the hero that he's going to become. This movie, it really feels like by the end of this movie that Tom Holland becomes Spider-Man. Like he finally becomes Spider-Man. All these other movies, he was Spider-Lad, Spider-Boy. He was like a sidekick, if you will. It all leads up to this. It's almost as if these last 3 movies were his origin story of what made him the real Spider-Man that he's about to become. So if anything, this movie actually left me more excited for the upcoming Spider-Man films than I actually was for this one. You know, don't get me wrong, I was really excited for No Way Home, but I tempered my expectations because I know that it had so much going on with it that it could come out like a hot mess. But it didn't come out like a hot mess. It actually came out pretty good. But the way this movie ended, it just set up something that I'm really interested in seeing. I'm really interested in seeing Tom Holland be the Spider-Man that I know and love. Be the traditional Spider-Man. You know, I think Tom Holland's an awesome Peter Parker. He's an awesome Spider-Man. But the way the MCU has written him and things they've given him to do just made him feel less like Spider-Man to me than he should have. But now I really am excited to see where they take this. And also the way this movie ends, it doesn't end in a satisfying way to where I would be okay with this being the last movie for Tom Holland. It sets it up to me like, not only for a 4th film, but we need more movies going forward. I would say right now that we need at least another 3 films, honestly. Because I don't think they're going to leave it off to where Ned and MJ just never figure out who Peter Parker is, or it's left like this. I do believe that he's going to go back and find a resolution to that somehow, you know? But if something happens and this is the end, then it still wraps up beautifully. It still wraps up beautifully, like, all right, you know, Ned's okay, you know, MJ's okay, they're about to go on with their best life, and Spider-Man's still going to be out there being your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but it leaves you definitely excited to see where they're going to take it from here. And I definitely 100% believe by the way the movie played out that this isn't the last you're going to see of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And I know they've already made, you know, announcements about that, but you can never really be too sure, because I'm telling you right now, we all thought we were going to get a Spider-Man 4. We all thought we were going to get an Amazing Spider-Man 3. It didn't happen. So just because they say it's going to happen doesn't mean it's going to happen. But judging by the way this movie played out and the success of this movie, which make no mistake about it, this is going to be probably the most successful movie since all this, you know, crazy stuff has been going on in the world. So I definitely think it's going to call for more sequels, and I can't wait to see where they go with it. So overall, really enjoyed the film. I want to touch on a few more things, though. The pacing of the movie, it felt different. It felt different than most movies I've ever seen. It felt more, the pacing of the movie felt more like a comic book than a movie. And some people are going to have a problem with that, but with me, I did not. Simply because I watched all the other movies. If you haven't seen the other Spider-Man movies, going into this movie, you're going to feel confused. You're going to feel weird. This doesn't feel like a standalone movie that can really stand on its own 2 feet. This is a movie where you have to not only watch Tom Holland's 2 Spider-Man movies, but you really need to watch Tobey's Spider-Man movies and Andrew's. So going into this movie, if you're just going in without seeing those movies, this movie's not going to mean that much to you, and you're going to be able to really see the problems with the film. But someone like me who's seen all of these movies, I go into this movie automatically knowing all of this stuff, so it blends perfectly for me. But I can see where with people who don't have as much knowledge about these movies would have a problem. But I dug that the movie didn't feel like it needed to take time out to over-explain things to people who haven't seen it. It just assumed that you have seen it, and if you didn't, oh well. Because the movie didn't have a traditional beginning, middle, and ending for me. It kind of just seemed like it coasted throughout. Like, mind you, it was, a little zigzaggy. There was a little things, but from the opening of the movie to the beginning, it's just like, shoo. That's the only way I can explain it. I can't even explain it with words. I would have to explain it with a sound, and it's just like, shoo. That's kind of how the movie was. It didn't take too much time to explain things. There wasn't the traditional like beginning, middle, and ending. It was more like a comic book. It kind of assumed that you already knew about the previous issues, and it just took you along the story, and it didn't feel the need to hit beats like a traditional movie would. Whereas I know the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies aren't like that, and even I would say the other two Tom Holland Spider-Man movies aren't like that, but this seemed like more of a comic book because it just reads straight through without pausing where normal movies would pause. But overall, I'm pleased with the movie. I'm happy with it. I know that I picked apart some things here, but I had fun, and that's all I can really ask for. I will say that it's a movie that, with more viewings, people will probably find more things wrong with it, but it has enough right with it that it will never be a bad movie in my eyes. I could watch this movie probably 1,000 times, and I could probably pick out so many things wrong with it while still enjoying it. Follow me here. Follow me real quick. I'm trying to find the proper words to describe it. It's one of the best movies that I've ever seen that I could just totally pick apart and make it sound like it's a crap movie, but it's something that's enjoyable. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's one of the best movies I've ever seen. I'm just saying it's one of the best movies that I've ever seen that had as many problems as it did while still maintaining its enjoyability. Like, this movie had problems. And this movie was underwhelming in areas where I felt like they could have done so much more with it. But even given that, it was so enjoyable and so fun. You follow what I'm saying? Like, sure, I could sit down and pick apart this movie, and I feel like with more viewings, you're going to find more and more things wrong with this movie. But it's always going to be a fun movie. It was a fun movie. There wasn't any like political agendas pushed in here. There wasn't a feminist agenda to this movie like a lot of the last Marvel projects. It was just a fun, good movie, and it brought me back to the days of fun, good films, like when we could just sit down and not have someone preach to you, not someone have all of these other, messages that they feel like they need to cram into a movie, to fit with today's woke political, standards. It just felt like a good, fun film. Can I pick it apart? Can I point out a lot of things wrong with it? Yes. Are there things I would have done differently? Yes. Are there some things that maybe upsetted me? Yes. But overall, I had fun. And they did a good job. It wasn't perfect, but they did a good job. And they left me wanting more. I didn't leave the theater upset. And I've left the movie upset before. I've left the movies upset plenty of times. So I know how it feels. I know how it feels to leave a movie and to enjoy it and then later hate it. I know how that feels. I'm not getting those vibes here. I'm getting the vibe that I liked the movie, I enjoyed the movie. There's nitpicky things that I didn't enjoy, but overall I'm pleased. I think I would say it's like an 8 out of 10. An 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10. I wouldn't give it a 10 because it's not perfect. I wouldn't give it a 9 simply because of some of the stupid decisions that were made. So 8 out of 10, I think, is a solid rating for this film. And I think that everyone should go watch it in theaters. Do not wait to watch it at home, do not wait for the crowds to die down. You need to go out here and watch this movie with the crowd so you can really feel the energy and really feel the excitement, because I promise you, the energy and excitement that you feel inside will amplify times 10 when you got a whole movie theater just going insane when these people pop up on screen, because this movie is all about the fan service, but it's fan service done right. And to really enjoy the fan service, you need to be surrounded by other fans. But overall, I highly recommend that you go watch this movie. I'm going to make more videos about it. I want to talk about it a little bit more, but like I said, I'm fresh out the theater. My mind's still jumbled up. I'm trying to process everything. I haven't even seen the movie twice yet. I need to see it again. So once I get more thoughts and I think about it a little bit more, I'll come back for more videos. But for now, that's what I have to say about Spider-Man No Way Home. I want to know your thoughts about it down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and as always, find some time out of your day to go watch a movie.